Okay, good evening. Appreciate everyone coming out tonight. A little down in number, but we'll faithful few. Okay, so last week we talked about David and Goliath, and I kind of ran out of time to kind of drive the lessons home, which is kind of counterintuitive to my whole purpose of teaching. So I want to spend just a few minutes here just kind of recapping, and I always do, but definitely the lessons. You know, we talked about how there's so many things that we can draw, and some of them are kind of obvious that we've always talked about that story, but that we should be, you know, God is bigger than our fears. Anything that we have in our life, if we can put it to God, let God handle those situations and take care of us. You know, David definitely did that, and God took care of him. And our size doesn't matter. You know, matter for our lives, maybe we don't think we have a lot of skills, or we don't think that we can contribute something, or we can do something, and that's definitely not the case. David was able to use the resources that he had, however meager they may be. We talked a little bit about those resources and how that sling was actually a fairly good weapon. I thought that was a good study about that, but basically, I think the whole point that we need to kind of drive home about David and Goliath is definitely don't underestimate God. No matter what situation you're in, you know, God will take care of us, and God will bless us and watch over us. That's definitely the case. And so always be thinking about that. Did anybody have any other thoughts about David and Goliath to kind of close the loop on that they wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I read an article not long ago about that, and this guy was saying, you know, we act like we think that David was going to lose. And, you know, we see a basketball game where a big, powerful team, and there's an underdog, and we think that's a David and Goliath. No. If you think the little guy's going to win, that's the David and Goliath, because we ought to think David's going to win.
No matter what.
Yeah. We shouldn't go into that story thinking, well, you know, David's going to lose. No, David, we should know.
He's got to reach down and find another level or something to help him beat the guy. And it's all part of God.
You know, and the point the guy was making is we go at that story backward.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the whole point is God's guy's going to win.
Yeah. Very good. Anything else on lesson 2?
I would say I was blessed to be over there in Israel, I guess 10 years ago now, and I actually picked up 5 stones there. Did you do that when you were there?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they must bring them out because everybody who goes there picks up 5 stones.
Big tall people with them.
Well, we talked a little bit about those stones, how they were actually, at least this is what I've read, the research that I've shown, it said they were baseball to softball size, but they were round, but they were smooth, but they were round, a little denser maybe than other normal rocks, and we talked about how the sling that you could shoot it out almost like a gun, almost the speed of a gun. So
Remind me of a ping pong ball.
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize and it's not really said here, but when you do some research, especially on Goliath, he had 4 older brothers, or 4 brothers as well. And I think it's important for us to realize the foresight that God gave David when he went down to the battling brook, and that is that not only does he have to deal with Goliath, but he potentially has 4 more adversaries that he might have to take care of.
Interesting.
So
Ishbi-Benob was one of them. I love that name, Ishbi-Benob.
Yeah. Hey, anything else about David and Goliath?
Talking about being over there, and I think I mentioned this last week. One of the things that, if you ever have the opportunity to go over there, you need to go. Because there's so many places where you say, yeah. And where this happened, 2 hills and a valley in between it, and you know, somebody standing down that valley could be heard.
Yeah.
You know, right up, and and the people up here can see the people over here. The setting of that thing is just, you walk out there and you say, yep, that's it. That's what it,
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to lesson 3. I want to talk about 1 Samuel chapter 18 through verse 20. I hope you had a chance to read that. I said 18 through 31 last week, that I might divide it up into a couple lessons, so that couple lessons is probably going to turn into 3. as I got into working on it this week. There's just so much there when we talk about David and his wanderings, I guess his exile and the period of running from Saul. There's so much there. And as I got into it, it just, there was a lot that I didn't want to glaze over. And so I want to give the proper time for that. So I've eaten up the extra week that I had and may have to combine a couple other weeks. So we'll get through it. I want to spend the time that we need to. So if you turn there, this is, of course, is right after David and Goliath, which was in 17. So it starts out talking in chapter 18, and we're going to, as time allows, I'm going to have to keep my eye on the clock. We'll read some of these passages and try to avoid super long readings. I do have one later in 20 that I want to talk about. But as we open in 18, we see that it kind of focuses on the relationship with Jonathan very quickly there, who is Saul's oldest, or his firstborn son. And so this is right after David and Goliath. It says, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, closing out chapter 17, when Saul was asking him, whose son is this? And he talked to him about who he was, and David told him who he was. It says that the soul of Jonathan was knit together with David. And that's going to come into play as we get into chapter 20 a little bit more. But it's interesting that you see that, and you think about that, where you have those relationships. And we're going to kind of talk about the relationships that we have with people and other Christians and other people. That's kind of the focus of tonight's lesson, but we're going to use these couple of chapters to talk about those kind of things. So it also then kind of moves right into the relationship that David has with Saul here. And it talks about that it kind of forms the relationship for these other ones that we're going to talk about. So if you kind of read verses 6 through 16 there, we're not going to read that real quick, but this is talking about Saul, and Saul has struck down his thousands, David his 10,000s. Verse 8, Saul was very angry at this, and it displeased him. All right. And so verse 10, a harmful spirit from God rushes upon Saul. He raves in his house while David was playing the lyre. All right. And he throws his spear at him in verse 11. Saul throws his spear at David. I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. So now Saul has, I guess you could say, kind of gone around the bend. All right. He's really just out of control. His jealousy and his rage is driving everything else that he does. He is focused solely on destroying David in any way that he can do that. And so he no longer, loved David as he may have said that he did. But, I think it's interesting that, God, David escapes here. He doesn't, talk back to Saul or anything. He just gets out of there because he still, again, he has that respect for Saul, who is still God's anointed, no matter how crazy he may be at this point in time. So I think it's important that we see that. And then we come into down to verse 12, and Saul's afraid of David, right, because he knew that the Lord was with him, but had departed Saul. So again, Saul is knowledgeable here about what's going on, and David has success in everything that he does. Verse 14, and everything went for Israel and Judah went for David. Then we get to verse 17, and Saul is kind of, if you think back to David and Goliath, what was one of the prizes of him beating Goliath? Anybody remember? He got Saul's daughter, which in this case was Merab, all right, his oldest daughter, in theory. All right, so he offers David Merab. All right, David, verse 18, who am I and who are my relatives that I should be a son-in-law to the king? He's not really interested in that. I don't know if you assume it's the respect, or anything like that. It's not maybe that he just wasn't in love with Merab or whatever, but he passes on that. And so, however, his other daughter, or at least one of his other daughters, Michal, all right, down in verse 20, she loves David, and so David accepts in this case. All right, he says second time to him in verse 21, you shall now be my son-in-law. All right, so Saul's kind of putting his foot down, I guess. All right, and so now the reason he's doing that, though, is not because he really loves David. He wants to use this as a snare to get back at David and to get into David and to be able to finish him. however he can do so. Everybody with me so far? Any questions about how he gets to Michal? All right, so he's now still in those times when they had, I guess you could call them a dowry or something like that, a price that you had to kind of pay in order to obtain that bride, and so he still requires that. And David says he uses that to say, okay, I want you to kill 100 is it Philistines? Yeah, Philistines, and bring me their foreskins. All right, kind of a gruesome story there, but that's Saul is like, surely they'll gang up on him or something, and between 100 of them, they'll kill David, and that'll be the end of it. And obviously, David has God on his side, and David says, no big deal, I threw in an extra 100 just for fun. All right, so he kills 200 of them and brings the foreskins to Saul, all right? And so that's where we're at as we get to kind of the end of verse 30. And so now he's married to Michal. He's done what he's supposed to do and all of that. Any questions up to that point? I don't want to rush through that, but I wanted to kind of to get through that. So because Michal's relationship is going to now, we're going to talk about that a little bit as we get into chapter 19, in addition to Saul's craziness.
I think he's, I guess I fail to understand when he's offered Merib, Saul makes the comment, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So again, is the bitterness already there? Is that how I'm reading that? The bitterness is already kind of starting to dwell against David? Or is he just saying don't let me be mad at him, just, if anyone's gonna be mad, let me, I don't know how to read that.
I mean, again, this is my opinion, but since you asked the question, I'll let others comment. He's basically saying he wants David to die, but he's also going to do it. He's desperate, as Mike was saying last time. He wants, if he can get somebody else to do it and take the blood off of his hands, he's willing to let it happen. Sure. He's going to try that first, and then he's already tried to kill him,
right,
by throwing a spear against him. So I don't, again, I don't know. You were going to say something.
I think he's quite torn. I think he's very nervous and jealous of David because he sees that the Lord is with him and he sees what's going on in David's life. So he's very threatened. He feels somewhat threatened. He already knows that the kingdom is no longer his. God's already told him that. So he's probably, David's proved himself as being one of the most loyal servants to him. So he's probably quite torn right now because he's like, okay, what do I do? I mean, this guy's the nicest guy in the world to me, but I can't stand him right now. And so it's, in my eyes, it's a torn man. Yeah. Which is, a torn man is quite a bit more tortured than someone who's settled on one thing.
Sure. I mean, again, and I guess now a hypothetical question, it makes me wonder if he said, yeah, all right, I'll take Merib, if the bride price was still going to be the 100 foreskins, or if it was like, no, you killed Goliath, we're good, we're even. But, again, hypothetical.
The text doesn't say what the bride price was for Merib, but it seems logical that it would have been the same thing because that's the plot. He's going to get David by giving his daughter, but the requirement is going to be something he can't meet.
Yeah,
and when
probably doesn't care who it is.
Yeah,
as long as
doesn't care who it is.
Yeah,
because he's figuring, hey, he might get married, but he ain't gonna live long, so
yeah.
Get that.
Yeah.
And the Philistines hate him anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, he just completely demoralized them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking that David did not have the bride price for Merib. Because if you look at, verse 18, who am I and what is my life or my father's family in Israel? We're nobody. We don't have the bride price to pay for the king's daughter. And so that's why he put him off. And then
he came up with the plan.
then he came up with a plan. And again, I think, this is just me thinking, and it's kind of what you said, the fact that, going back to verse 13, Saul couldn't kill him, so he made him captain, in the army, thinking, okay, he's in the army, we're at war, that'll take care of it.
Well, verse 25 says, when he gives the dowry price for Michael, says that, where I done lost my
Well, verse
spot.
23 says, I'm poor and lightly esteemed, I don't have the money.
The king desires
So
no
you
bride
don't have the
price.
money, so okay, here's an option.
But Saul, it says, but Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. That's the whole key to the
Yeah.
thing. Whether it was Moab, Merab, or Michael.
He tried to pull a Uriah the Hittite before Uriah the Hittite.
Yeah.
That's
That's where David got the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Deja vu all over again.
So we move into chapter 19, and I don't have my transitions on this slide for some reason, so y'all are probably already ahead of me. But we see that basically Saul here he's going to try to kill David, but even Jonathan he kind of enters the picture back here again, and he's trying to persuade Saul in verses first couple verses there, saying, don't let the king sin against David because he's not sinned against you. Verse 4, he took his life into his own hands. Verse 5, and the Lord worked. So Jonathan's kind of working on Saul here. And in verse 6, Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. So Jonathan called David. Jonathan reported him all these things. And so David then worked in his presence as before. So Jonathan probably feels like, okay, I've kind of calmed my dad down a little bit. He's not going to do this anymore. And we're going to see that that's obviously not the case, because they went then immediately, verse 8, there was war again. David goes out to fight them. Verse 9 is pretty straightforward. A harmful spirit came upon Saul, and he grabbed a spear. Verse 10, he tries to pin him to the wall again. So Saul has now tried twice to kill David with a spear. So now, and we get into verse 11, and Saul is like, okay, now I'm going to go back to my plan with Michal here and see if I can get her to help me. So he sends him to the house. Saul sends messengers to David's house. But Michal here says she's going to try to, she says, if you don't escape tonight, you're going to be killed. Saul's men and messengers are going to get to you. And so, as we've kind of seen in other escape plans in the Bible, it lets him out down through the window. He fled away and he escapes. And so then Michal takes this an image or an idol of some kind, and basically Alcatraz style there, Clint Eastwood Alcatraz style, puts a paper mache head, that's what I think of it, with hair and everything in the bed to make him seem like he's sick. And so she basically, when they come and ask him, she tells the people he's sick. And so they leave her alone, go back to Saul. Saul realizes it and comes back into verse 17 there. Why have you done this and let the enemy go? Saul, he's just outright calling him the enemy now. Verse 8. Why have you let the enemy go? Now, so Michal, although honest in her attempt to help David escape, kind of takes the easy way out here, and she lies, and she says, well, he said he would kill me. Basically, is the way I read that. He was, if I didn't let him go, he's going to kill me. Why should you die too? That's what she says. So she basically says that David threatened her if he didn't let her go. So that's not really true. All right. But Jonathan will, so Michal kind of takes, she doesn't face the reality of her father here. That she doesn't want to. She's taking the easy way out. Jonathan, as we're going to see as we get into chapter 20, is not going to take necessarily the easy way out. And I think that's important to know. But from here on out, and because of that, I mean, even though Michal helped David escape, from here on out, David's relationship with Michal is done. Okay, it's bad. It's not going to ever be repaired at this point. Any thoughts?
Have you commented on verse 9, an evil spirit from the Lord?
We talked a little about what that was, what kind of spirit it was. We talked a little bit about that when he began to be in Saul's service a couple of weeks ago. The only thing I really noted was that it was lowercase s. This is not the Holy Spirit, obviously, that we're talking about. I've read some things that say, well, it wasn't a demon or anything like that, but it was obviously something from God in essence, because, you know, it's to me, that was Saul's punishment for not destroying the people that he was supposed to way back at the beginning of all this. That's the reason God's upset with Saul. But I welcome any thoughts you have on it. So you brought it up, so you know.
I said, have you? No, it's, you know, the Lord is good, has no evil within him.
Right.
The Lord tempts no one. So it's just an interesting verse, and a similar thought is given to Pharaoh.
I think part of that is, you know, one of the greatest feelings that we experience as Christians is the forgiving grace that God gives us.
Mm-hmm.
Saul didn't have that, and you got to think that, in my eyes, that spirit that keeps popping up is more so his spirit that is showing him his shortcomings and his failures that he's had and that he is continuously having, and David's success. And so it would be a troubling spirit and to that person, to Saul.
Yeah.
When you constantly live with your guilt for things that you've done in your past, guilt can steer you down some very, very nasty roads.
Right.
Well, we know that Saul was head and shoulders above everybody. Good looking guy. My guess he was very vain, very paranoid. And what we also have to remember, God can use evil people and evil things to advance his ends. He's done it for centuries. Here, a distressing spirit doesn't necessarily mean that it was from God, but God is using this.
From the Lord.
Okay, but you're putting a meaning on that phrase "from the Lord" that may not be there. He may have sent it. He may have utilized it. You know, if I send somebody a flower, it came from me, but I utilized the delivery guy. And here I think that's what God is doing, utilizing his own vanity, his own paranoia, his own
spirit.
Yeah, his own spirit.
Just like you just.
Yeah.
Is it possible a distressing spirit is not an evil spirit, but a spirit that works within him to cause pain and affliction within himself?
Yeah, and this is a lot like hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
Now we know that God didn't reach out and touch Pharaoh's heart, but he took advantage of the disposition of Pharaoh's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And through certain circumstances, the response that Pharaoh had to what happened hardened his heart. And this distressing spirit, I think, was Saul's response to what was happening, that God, through his providence, allowed to happen.
Good discussion. Anybody else have
You look back on chapter 16, verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. You know, why did it depart?
That was capital S though, right? I think if we
Yeah.
that's what we initially talked about.
Right.
So yeah.
Why did it depart?
Well, I think that was because if my study was that it was when he disobeyed God by not completely destroying.
Exactly. It did depart because of what Saul did.
Yeah.
And then it says, when it leaves, an evil spirit
Lowercase
from the Lord
s. Yeah.
tormented him.
Yeah.
Well, there's an example. Why did he not do what God said? And the excuse that he used, hey, we brought back the best stuff to sacrifice to you. And that was a self-aggrandizing thing that he was going to do.
Yeah.
Because to please God and glorify God, he would have done what God said. But he said, no, here's a great opportunity for me to.
Yeah.
Look at believers that have backslid and the spirit that they deal with. That's kind of how I am. He's the ultimate backslider. I mean, there was no turning back.
Yeah, Dave, Steve.
I understand it this way, is that whenever, even today, a person is confronted with God, they will either accept and be at peace, or they will reject and fight the rest of their life, and it's an internal battle. And that's what I see, that internal battle.
Yeah, I think, this is actually the last thing that I was going to talk about, but I can talk about it now and bring it back. We're going to see that God's going to stand with those people who are with him and for him, and against those who reject him. God's grace was definitely on Saul here. I mean, we're going to talk about in the coming weeks the numerous times that David could have killed him, and God let him live, and that was you're gonna. You disobeyed me, but you can stay king, but your kingdom's going to be divided. It's going to have its own problems, and so we talk about that. So then we get into verse 18 at the end of chapter 19 here. I don't have time to read it, but this section here where David is now at, and he comes to Samuel. We see a Samuel sighting here in verse 18 of chapter 19 at Ramah. All right, and so Saul, he hears about it. He sends messengers down there. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, verse 20, Samuel standing his head over, and the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul who had been there to kill David, and they also prophesied. All right, when then Saul hears about, the people that you sent, they prophesied. Saul sends messengers again, and then he sends them a third time. And so God is intervening here. They're trying to get to David, and it just kind of seems like a weird, funny thing. And to top it all off, Saul goes down there by himself. Again, fine, I'll just take care of it myself. And he goes down there and he begins prophesying. Now, what does anybody have any thoughts about this prophesying? I guess it just means telling about David, or what do we think of prophesying means? Anybody have anything?
I think of that as just glorifying God.
Glorifying God. Okay. And we don't have a lot of time to spend on that, but I was just curious about that. But he strips off his clothes. He lays naked all that day and all that night. So
that happens.
yeah, yeah. So just kind of a weird thing there. I think that happens, and obviously to me that just proves that God is working in this situation. So, all right, let's move into chapter 20. All right, so but I thought I had my transitions here. So David fled. Okay, in verse 20. And we're going to kind of talk next week. I've got some map points that we're going to go through. We're going to see about all the different places that he kind of wanders here. All right. So the period of exile, to say the least. All right. So the first 17 verses of chapter 20 is kind of where Jonathan and David are kind of, proclaiming their relationship, proclaiming their love to one another. Jonathan, verse 12, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. What Jonathan is saying here is, and this is kind of another interesting story, is that we see Jonathan's telling David, if I think they already kind of knew, but Jonathan's like, if my dad is really, out to kill you here, if this is where he's at, I'm going to let you know. And they devise this plan with the arrows. You probably heard this story where he gets this guy, says, if I shoot these arrows a certain place, then you need to get out of here. That's your sign. I won't even, we don't even need to meet. That's what they're saying. And so they come along here, and I wish we had time to read through 42, but time's running short. So what I think is interesting, if you look at verse 33, down into verse 33. So Jonathan, he prepares this feast, and he says that David can't be here, all that. He comes up with this plan, and he's feeling out Saul here, and he says, he tells him, hey, I can't do that. And then he realizes in verse 30, Saul does, he says, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? So Saul is telling this to his own son here. All right, he's saying, you're with him, you've left me, have no part of me. Verse 33, Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. All right, so I think this is a second bend that Saul has gone around here. Right now, he's trying to kill his own son. All right, he throws a spear at his own son to kill him. That's how much his own disregard is. All right, And what I find funny is, okay, so Jonathan executes his plan here. He tells the guy with the arrows, shoot him where I tell you. And that was the sign to David, you need to get out of here. Okay, my dad's, all he wants to do is kill you. That's all he cares about. So the guy goes out there and shoots these arrows. Maybe I'm the only one that finds this funny. Jonathan's like, I want you to do this, you need to run away. So the guy shoots the arrows, but Jonathan gets up and goes and meets him anyway. David's probably like, what are you doing? Get down. I thought you were going to come see me. But Jonathan loves him so much, I guess he had an opportunity to go talk to him or whatever through this situation. So I don't really know. My point is, I don't really know the meaning of the arrows. It really didn't do any good because Jonathan went out to meet and talk with him anyway. And Jonathan kind of knows, this is probably the last time that you and I are going to be, you're going to be wandering, you're going to be doing this and that. My dad is going to be chasing you. You need to get out of here. All right. And so he kind of shows here as we kind of conclude this, what it means to be a true friend. And I think here's some lessons that we can take from Jonathan's relationship with David and apply them to our own lives maybe. So I think one of the things that's important is that jealousy, will absolutely control your life and thoughts if you let it. And that's from Saul. All right. And David's going to see this as he goes throughout. It's like, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. We've heard that phrase before. All right. He's going to know who's on his side, but he's also going to know where Saul is. And he's going to respect that relationship. True friends that you have in your life will be a benefit and they will enhance your life. I want you to think about people that have come in contact in your life. Maybe since you were a kid or that you found in college, or even your spouse, whatever it is. Think about those relationships and how they enhance your life. And so here's some things that I think that Jonathan did. They're not on the slides, but their relationship had these characteristics in it. And I think if you have relationships that have this, that you will definitely be benefited. One is that their relationship was first and foremost committed to God and God's plan. Whatever God, Jonathan respected, again, we talked about Jonathan really was in line to be king after Saul. But he recognized that it was part of God's plan that David was to be king. And so whatever God's plan was, that was the first and foremost thing in their lives. All right? And nothing was going to come between them, not even, in Jonathan's case, not even his own father. Okay? He wasn't going to let whatever his father's problems were get in the way of his relationship with David, because it was, back to number one, committed to God. And I think the third point is that you can draw closer in your relationships with people during times of testing. And I think Jonathan saw all of these things that, trying to help my friend here. I'm trying to help him out and keep him safe. And we're really being tested here by my father trying to kill him. And through all of that, the first 17 verses of chapter 20 they're committing their love again to each other. Because all this is going on, I'm going to be there. We're knit together, remember? They use that word. The Bible uses that word. They're knit together in the soul. And they were faithful to the end. Again, from this point on, some things that David loses here, if you think about it, and we're going to kind of develop these thoughts into next week, is, he loses a position with Saul here. He loses a wife, right? He's not going to meet with Samuel anymore after this, all right? He loses, I say he loses, he doesn't get to see Jonathan anymore after all this, and he has to flee. So there's so many things that he loses, and he doesn't care because it's what's God's will. But back to the friends thing, as we're almost out of time, and then we'll have some time for comment. You need to find I have a friend that I met in college. Many of you know him, Mike Boggs. We get along very well, and we have that relationship. And I think it's important to have people that are of the same sex, friends that you can confide in, that are honorable, loyal, willing to sacrifice their time, willing to sacrifice their energy. I mean, think about Jesus. Even he had what he would call, an inner circle. He had those three that he spent the most time with, I think that's important for us to understand. But through all of this, I think it's, as I mentioned here, that service to God is not always easy. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34 through 36, that I did not come, to bring peace, although that's what Satan talked about tonight. But, to bring, the when we serve God and we do things, we might make enemies in our life sometimes, and we might have those times where we have people that are against us, and we're going to see that really in the next couple of weeks, where David is really fleeing from Saul. So, what points do we have on this? We've got a minute or two left. Anything? I know I kind of rushed through that. I apologize.
On top of the other things it's lost, at least for a period of time, he lost his country.
Yeah.
I mean, he's lost essentially everything physical.
Right.
I think one thing that is in here is, right after he flees to Ramah, and the issue at Ramah happens where even Saul starts prophesying. I think it's quite sad to see, after God showed David how powerful he was, that David was very human still, and ran, and fled. And not only did he flee from a safe house, but he fled to Gath.
Yeah. Where
Goliath's
Yeah.
hometown,
Yeah.
where he was definitely hated.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else before we have a prayer and dismiss? Next week, read through chapter 25, verse 1. That's where Samuel dies. So we'll try to cover 21 through the first verse of 25 and expand upon that.
The only other comment,
Yeah.
the only other comment I had is, and this I think applies to us today, is at this point that he's now basically on his own, he's gotta be thinking, I know I'm in God's plan somehow, but I don't see it right now.
Joseph, anyone? Yeah. I mean, just you don't know what you're doing. And we're going to see he gets a little bit of help from his family and some fighting men as he starts escaping. But still, yeah, you're right. I mean, right now he's got to feel like he's Joseph in jail. Right now. I mean, where am I supposed to go? What's going on? So we're kind of at a low point right now. But and he's going to continue to run in the next couple of weeks. But we'll get there. All right, let's have a prayer. We'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings, and we just ask that you continue to heap those upon us as you have, and we're thankful for this time of study and the comments that we had. We're thankful for the relationships that we have in our lives and those that care for us and love us and that we can trust and rely on, like David and Jonathan. And Father, we just ask that you continue to help us to expand those relationships and look for those ways to use them to glorify you in every way that we can. Father, we ask that you be with Brother Mike and his procedure tomorrow. Keep him safe and be with those that will be caring for him as well. Thank you so much again for sending Jesus to die on the cross for our sins, that we can spend eternity with you. In his name we pray.